Welcome to the course Guidelines for Dashboard Design. The fifth lesson is focused on the criteria to follow when designing. These are some general guidelines that should be considered, and when the design is complete, we should check that these basic rules have been followed. And before starting with the guidelines with those criteria, I would like to briefly review the design process. Ultimately, the design process is a creative process that can be generally classified into 4 stages of work. In the first one, we focus on the users, on their experience, what we will offer to them by means of the dashboard. We focus on understanding, observing, and defining what the user's experience is like at their job, what that experience that will be supported by the tool of access to data that is a dashboard will be. Then comes a creative part that sometimes is a little hard to explain, when we sit down to create the solution that will satisfy the user's experience. It is when we say that if we provide them with this, they will be able to do their job in a better way. And then there is a selection phase in which we develop a prototype. We show it to the users, we receive feedback for the prototype, we produce a second version until we get to the execution phase, in which we can implement, develop the tool according to the program we use to create and to make that dashboard design operational. And something very important in the design phase, and this is what sometimes makes it hard to communicate, is that there is not a methodology, a formula that we simply apply and we solve it, as we would do in other areas. Finally, that design must be data-driven. Data is what should tell us what the visualization works, and this is how we can use data. This is the usability that we can apply. This is the tool that we can provide to the user. So let's go on with the criteria. One of the first criteria that we should take into account is never including more than 7 metrics on one single screen. This is an example. We can see that the criterion is applied on this dashboard. The fact is that in the end, the human brain can remember 4 or 5 elements easily. But it is more difficult if we launch 10, 15, or 20 data elements. And the user must try to remember them to be able to relate all those elements with one another. So 7 is considered a healthy number, 5 is better. But more than 7 metrics should be avoided. In this case, we have a first, second, third, fourth, and fifth metric. So we can see that this dashboard meets the first requirement or the first criterion of a maximum of 7 metrics per screen. Another criterion is to use the concepts we have seen regarding the use of color, and also to apply them to the use of the graphs, fonts, etc. In this example, we observe a good combination of colors, a very pleasant palette, calm colors that inspire calmness, that allows us to navigate through the dashboard and to appreciate the data in detail. Graphics are clean, they define the areas neatly. We can observe how white is used in the columns on the graph above instead of using, for example, black lines. The use of graphic lines makes it more accessible, and on the other hand, it respects the idea of ink for data. A third criterion is how to represent data. It is important that we always use appropriate graphics according to the nature of the data we are representing. For example, a historical series of 15 years is much easier to appreciate on a line graph than on a histogram or on a bar graph. And so we can see that different types of displays can be used if we are showing relationships, or if we want to see a trend over time, or if we want to analyze a text, or if we want to compare values, parts of a whole, if we want to see the data in the context of the world or that of a country. Below you can find the address of a site from where you can download a decision tree that allows us to define the type of graph that is more appropriate for the data we want to represent. The hierarchy of data is another important element. Unlike other concepts where equality is important, when displaying data, we must recognize that there are data that are more important than others, and the more important data must have more visual strength in our dashboard. In this case, the coverage data shown on the map is very important, and therefore, it is on the first position. It is the first thing that the users look at when they log on one hand, and also it takes up most of the space. That tells us from the very beginning that all this information is very important in the context of what we are evaluating. Also, when visualizing, we can use a background image. In this case, a concept of infographics has been applied to a dashboard. Visually, it seems an infographics, but it has the functions of a dashboard as data is not static and is going to be read from a database. It is recalculated and displayed every time the dashboard is loaded. On the other hand, there are buttons, these crosses on the bottom of the screen, that allow users to interact and see more detailed data. In the end, the infographics works like a menu that enables the user to access the set of indicators of this system that we see here. Then, whenever it is relevant and helpful for improving usability and functionality, we must use context menus. In this case, we see a graph that applies the concepts of color, font, etc. very well, but that separates the areas of data from the areas of filter with a line. And here we see the different options or the various parameters that the user may select and that will change the display represented by graphs by selecting one or more of them. Another important issue on a dashboard is to keep it simple. A dashboard does not have to be complicated. It does not have to be exotic, extravagant to be useful and to transmit data. This is a fairly well-built dashboard in which the set of filters comes first on the left. There is information which is the most important and therefore it is well positioned within the dashboard. The size is also dominant. The user's site will always tend to go here first and it will see a number that is important in the context of this dashboard, which will become immediately evident to the user. The user does not need to see, search, or interpret. This number becomes evident and it has been placed here because it is important, with a bold and quite big font compared to the rest of the data on the dashboard. And then information, the most general one, followed by the most detailed one where every color that appears is elaborated on the graph, or on the pie that we have on this side, which is the mix of investments. Simple, direct, making relevant what is the most important data. Then, if you remember the lessons seen in the conceptualization course, we can recall that there is nothing wrong if we include a table of data in a dashboard. And in this case, we have two graphs with a good visual data display, but the financial data, which is detailed, is displayed in a table so that it has the level of precision required by this data. Something that we must not forget in visualizations is the idea that communication is the priority. More than the aesthetics, which is important, or the visual elements, what really matters is the strength and ease with which they communicate. In these infographics, we see the causes of death in humans in the 20th century. And it is very easy to identify that the main ones were infections, people's age, non-communicable diseases, and cancer. No further interpretation is necessary to know that these are the most important and the high-level ones, and how each of them can have its own derivations. In general terms, cancer killed 530 million people, but different kinds of cancer were responsible for different populations. Communication in these infographics is direct, precise, and does not have to be complicated at all. Another important condition of a dashboard is that it highlights the most important data. In this dashboard, where epidemiology events are reported daily, the user needs to know right away whether there are immediate alert cases reported in the country. And this is so because each case implies a response from the health system. So the first and visually most relevant thing in this dashboard is this large red number that states that there were 3 cases on a specific date. This is the most relevant data. This is the strongest visual data. Then the user's view browses over the rest of the dashboard, but the first stop is always here. And here it is decided whether we are going to see the table, the location, or the types of cases. In short, we should remember not only from this lesson, but from the whole course, that in the case of dashboards, of these designs of any activity in which we seek perfection, perfection is not achieved when there is nothing else to add, but when there's nothing else to remove. If we look at the dashboards that we have shown, that we have used as a prototype, that we have validated with the user, and we no longer see anything else to remove, we know that we have reached the point to release our dashboard.